Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Toby Israel, and as everyone on this call knows, I am a level 4 certified ESD instructor, and today I'm presenting to apply for my global instructor certification with ESD Global. And as my topic of presentation today, I've chosen to talk about ESD as a healing modality because I think it's something that brings a lot of nuance to my approach to teaching ESD. And, oh good, I was worried that this wouldn't work. I have some videos I want to show. So to start, I want to share a very short clip from a video that we made about our self-defense tour of Costa Rica that we did in April. We visited 11 locations in 2 weeks and taught 12 ESD workshops all over Costa Rica. This is a very short after movie that we made about the experience. I'm just gonna, as a parenthesis, we're looking for funding to make a fuller length documentary about that. So I just want to show this and then talk a little bit about healing intergenerational trauma.
Un linaje de mucha violencia y mucho dolor, y cuando yo hago el trabajo para sanar y para conectar con mi poder, para tomar mi poder, yo estoy sanando también un linaje de desempoderamiento, tal vez. Y creo que cada mujer, cuando hace este trabajo de la autodefensa, hace lo mismo. Está sanando no solamente sus traumas, pero también los traumas intergeneracional que carga, porque todas cargamos esos.
So in case anyone couldn't see the subtitles in English, basically I'm just talking about doing the healing work. When we do healing work through ESD, we're also healing intergenerational trauma. And intergenerational trauma is something that I learned about many years before I had ever heard of ESD or taken an ESD class or become an ESD teacher. I was studying anthropology at Middlebury College in Vermont. And one of the articles or essays that came up in one of my classes was about intergenerational trauma, looking specifically at Holocaust survivors and their children. And it was the light bulb moment for me because I realized that I had lived intergenerational trauma. My grandparents on my mother's side were Holocaust survivors, and I grew up my entire life listening to my grandmother's stories about how she had survived the war. She never, earlier on in her life, she never wanted to talk about her experience. And when I was little, she decided that she wanted to share her story, and specifically, she wanted to share her story with me. So she started, every time I visited her from the time I was 5 or 6, she would tell me her stories, starting at an age where I was far too young to actually understand the full magnitude of what she was sharing with me or how important it was that she was sharing her story, but not too young to be marked by it. And so when I started learning about intergenerational trauma, I understood that the recurring dreams I had had my entire life about being chased through my house and running into the woods to hide weren't my nightmares. They were my grandmother's nightmares. And that my mother's anxiety wasn't just her anxiety, it was a lineage in our family of anxiety and fear and insecurity. And now, as an ESD practitioner, I understand ESD work through the same lens. I understand that when we work with trauma around sexual violence or abuse or harassment or disempowerment or lack of agency, we're not just working with our own trauma, we're working with a lineage of trauma and pain and violence that goes back generations, centuries, even millennia. And so that perspective is sort of running beneath the surface of everything that I do as an ESD practitioner, and it adds a layer of sort of depth and nuance to the way that I consider my work. And so with that perspective in mind of intergenerational trauma and intergenerational healing, I try to bring an especially holistic approach to the way that I teach self-defense, which is not to say that ESD isn't holistic already. I think ESD is an incredibly holistic methodology. But with my project, Mujeres Fuertes, or Strong Women, which I started a couple of years ago in Costa Rica, I try to make the process even more holistic. And so I offer my participants tools for somatic awareness and self-regulation that come from a range of modalities, from yoga and meditation and dance and movement practices to conscious communication, tantra, contact dance, and even things like acro yoga and massage. And what that does, first of all, is gives them a wide range of tools to navigate the process, the healing journey. And it also gives them tools to access connection and conscious communication. So for me, the other side of the no that we work with ESD, the no and the boundaries, is a yes. When we really learn how to say no, we also are able to fully say yes. And from my perspective, the work that we do to set clear boundaries and figure out where our boundaries are in our lives is actually allowing us to meet others in deeper connection, in spaces of security, safety, respect, and consent. And I also have generally a strong focus on trauma-informed practice. That was something that was important to me before I started my work with ESD as a yoga instructor, as a facilitator of retreats and experiences. But I've gone much deeper into exploring that piece of my work with some of the sort of ongoing education offered by ESD Global. So I've learned a lot more about trauma and trauma-informed practice. A big piece of that is creating safe spaces for people to learn and heal, and building communities and networks of support. So what does that look like in action? I teach in a lot of different kinds of spaces. I teach in festivals. I have taught in some schools and community spaces. I teach regular sort of ESD basics courses and introductory workshops all the time, but sort of the trademark of what I've created with Mujeres Fuertes are immersive retreat style empowerment experiences. So that means we take people out of their day-to-day lives and we bring them usually into a secluded space in nature for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, offer a full ESD basics course of 10 to 12 hours, but also offer yoga classes, meditations, time for nature connection, conversation, farm to table food. And what I've witnessed is that the result is a really profoundly healing experience because people have a chance to immerse themselves in the material, and they also have a chance to integrate what they're learning in nature, in community, with ceremony. Sometimes we do sweat lodges, fire circles, song circles, and just being generally in a safe space surrounded by other women who are going through the same journey. This, you might have seen this video's a couple of years old at this point, but gives an idea of what that experience looks like. Ella va a mirar hacia mi cara, hacia la mar, y va a pegar esta parte de no. So as you can see there, the slogan we have for Mujeres Fuertes Costa Rica is find your no, live your yes. And that for me is what healing work is about. It's about moving through pain, moving through violence, moving through fear into a space of greater connection, openness, love, and well-being. Yeah. So then getting into sort of the physiological and neurological level of this healing process, what's actually happening? Why is ESD a healing modality as well as a violence prevention methodology? Disclaimer, I am not an expert on trauma. It's just something I've become really interested in through my work and have learned about through my ESD training and also through my personal research. My scientific explanations may not be 100% up to par, but essentially, as I've understood it, traumatic memories are stored both in the body, so somatically, and in the limbic brain, or which is also called the lizard brain. It's the instinctive, non-thinking part of the human brain that governs our flight or fight response and our survival instincts. It's the instinctive brain. When we do healing work to heal from trauma, a necessary piece of that process is to revisit those traumatic memories, which are unconscious, and rewrite them, reprogram them, and store them as conscious memory, where they no longer hold a charge. And something incredibly powerful that I've witnessed in my ESD workshops and courses is that women often come into a course with certain wiring, certain beliefs programmed both into their mind and their body of, I didn't defend myself, I couldn't defend myself, I don't have tools to defend myself, I can't, I'm not able to. And through role play, through different physical or verbal dynamics, through actually like revisiting certain experiences in the context of a safe container, they're able to write a different story and actually wire that story into their body and into their brain. And that story becomes, I have all the tools I need to defend myself. I am able to defend myself. I'm strong enough. I can, and I will. And that's a really profound transformation that can happen over the course of just a couple of days. To do this work of revisiting trauma and rewiring it, it's critical to have safe spaces. Something that often, if you do this without having safe space and time for integration and support, often what happens is just re-traumatizing. So the safe space is a really important part of that process, as is community. We, as much as healing is a intergenerational process, I also believe it is a collective process. It's something that we do together as community. And so when we do this work in circles of women or just circles of people, because I often work with mixed gender groups as well, that healing has more levels and these sort of ripple out effects. One other sort of side benefit that I see of ESD is that it offers some healthy channels for women to experience and express emotions like anger, rage, and aggression, which is not the primary reason we do it, but I do think it's really healthy and necessary to have spaces to express those kinds of emotions. And most women never have those spaces from the time they're very young until the time they're an adult. Those are kinds of feelings that we're taught to repress or to hide. So to be able to express things like anger and rage in a safe space also has healing benefits. And I just want to share one testimonial, or at least one piece of it, which I think those on the call have seen, but other people watching this might not have seen.
Me llamo Natalia, soy de Argentina, estoy hace tiempo viviendo aquí en Puerto Viejo. Vine aquí para llenarme de seguridad, de confrontar miedos, y sorprendida, ¿no? También. Y aquí me encontré con un grupo de mujeres donde se creó un círculo de unión, de seguridad, y aprendí y encontré.
So she's basically saying that she came to the retreat. This was a retreat participant a couple of years ago, and she came to the retreat to face fears and to learn to feel safer, more confident. And she found herself in a circle of women where she experienced unity, safety, and healing.
Encontré en mí seguridades, fuerza y amor por mí y por los demás.
And that she found in herself confidence, strength, and love for herself and love for others. Something important in this particular testimonial, and something I hear very often in the closing circles that we do, is this sense of being in community, of being supported, of sort of being held through the process, which isn't necessarily the first thing we think of when we think of self-defense, because it's such a personal thing. You know, I am learning how to defend my body, my space, and it's maybe something, these are tools that I might have to apply alone without any support. At the same time, having the support, having that support network, and I'm going to talk in a moment more about the fifth principle of ESD, which is tell, having that support network is such a critical piece of violence prevention, of healing, and sort of processing experience after getting out of a risky or violent situation. And so the fifth finger, my favorite finger of ESD. Every ESD course or workshop that I teach, I start by talking a little bit about the history of the method and the 5 principles, or the 5 fingers of ESD: think, yell, run, fight, tell. And I always make a point of highlighting the importance of that 5th finger, tell, or sometimes we define it also as seeking support. In the work that I've done with healing, with leading experiences, with teaching ESD, I was a storyteller before I started this work, but I've really come to appreciate how important storytelling is for healing. A few years ago, I trained in a method called TIR, Traumatic Incident Reduction, which is, I don't practice it, but I do apply some of the principles that I learned there to my work with ESD. It's not a talk therapy, but you could compare it with a talk therapy approach to trauma healing. And it basically works with finding, if someone is going through this therapy, you find the story which may have been unconscious or forgotten or buried, and you find the story that holds a charge, and you repeat it over and over again until it no longer has a charge. And neurologically, what that's doing supposedly is taking a unconscious memory from the limbic brain, revisiting it and storing it as conscious memory in the conscious brain. And I apply it to sort of everyday experiences that I think we can all identify with. I know that if I experience something that's frustrating or upsetting or hurtful, the first thing I'll do is tell some friends about it. And if it's really upsetting, maybe I'll tell a dozen friends about it, and I'll tell the same story over and over again until all of a sudden I'm talking to someone about whatever experience I've just gone through. And I'm hearing myself talk and I'm thinking, oh my God, I cannot hear myself tell this story one more time. Like, I'm done with this story. And at that point, the story no longer holds a charge. So that's the way I think about TIR or storytelling when it comes to healing. Is like we keep sharing until something doesn't have a charge. And really, from a certain point of view, the difference between a traumatic experience and an upsetting experience is how we process it. So a traumatic experience, we could consider it to be an upsetting or violent experience that we have not been able to process, that maybe we have not told enough times. Other ways of processing trauma that sort of have the same effect include writing, therapy, and then there are also somatic approaches. But in my experience leading groups with ESD, telling, like verbalizing our experiences, sharing our stories is a really powerful way to get there. And the other piece of that that's really important is listening. We need to share our experiences, and we also need to be heard and held as we share them. one colleague from my level 1 training in New York in 2018 was in Costa Rica. It was either late last year or earlier this year, and she hopped into one of my retreats, and she was a really wonderful addition to that retreat. And afterwards, one of her pieces of feedback or just reflections for me was, wow, I don't think I've ever seen an ESD class where there was so much space for talking and sharing. And I really do think it's important to have that space for the fifth finger, for people to tell and to share. I often have women come into my courses who end up sharing stories and experiences that they've never told anyone, or that they've maybe only told once. And for me, it's really important to honor the trust and the safety beneath that when people sit down and feel like, okay, I'm in a safe place, I can tell my story here. And to make sure that there is enough space for them to be heard and for them to share within the context of an ESD course or retreat. This is just an image from my most recent retreat, which is a couple weeks ago, which was actually a mixed group of men and women. It's a story for another time, but I've also found it really interesting and rewarding and meaningful to teach ESD to mixed groups. So then, to conclude, I want to offer some suggestions for how you might replicate this approach or apply this lens of healing to ESD classes. In other words, these are some things that have proved to be effective for me, and I hope maybe they'll be useful to some people seeing this presentation. Number one, always for me, is setting ground rules at the beginning of a workshop or a course. I like to call them agreements and have everyone agree to them. This is a really simple and effective way to create safe space. Some of the agreements that I always use are respect, deep listening, staying in the space, respecting our own boundaries, respecting other people's boundaries, generally working to create a culture of consent, trying to stay free of judgment or blame, especially towards past actions or decisions. And well, there's one more really important one that I'm forgetting right now. But more or less, you get the idea. So just some ground rules that everyone agrees to operate under. As I already mentioned, leaving plenty of room for sharing, telling, listening, and storytelling. And to complement that, teaching skills for active listening and conscious communication so that within the context of the course and also in people's outside lives, they have more tools and strategies to give better support and also to ask for what they need. So to ask for the support that they need to receive. The more that I learn about trauma, the more that I talk about it in my ESD courses. I try to educate people, at least with some basic information about trauma, how trauma reactions can show up in conflict situations or situations of risk, danger, or violence, and to normalize those trauma responses. Something really common, I'm sure all of you have seen many times, is that people come into self-defense classes carrying a lot of guilt or shame about how they've reacted in the past. Those are not productive emotions. And the more we can normalize trauma responses and help people to understand that whatever way they've responded, reacted, whatever way they tend to react in conflict or danger is really normal, and that those responses exist for a reason, to help clear away some of that guilt and shame. In addition, I use a lot of movement arts. That's maybe specific to me as a movement artist, but I also believe that somatic practices, dance, massage, are really wonderful complements to ESD. They help people to get into their bodies, and they also help people to strengthen bonds of support and listening within the circle. So they help people cultivate sort of healthier interpersonal relationships. Women supporting women. One of the most common things that I hear when someone is about to come to a retreat or is on their way out of a retreat is, gosh, I was really nervous. I was really scared to be in a space with just women because my experiences with women in the past haven't been so positive, and I've experienced a lot of judgment or a lot of cattiness or women tearing me down, and I was really scared to be in this space with just women, and they leave with a totally different perspective, because what I try and do is create spaces where women really lift one another up and support one another. And finally, practicing self-care. It's really heavy work sometimes to hold space for healing and to hold space for so much of this storytelling and sharing and processing. And if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to keep doing it. So having a self-care practice as an ESD practitioner, I think, is a critical piece of continuing to be a healthy conduit for healing work. To close, we all know and appreciate how powerful ESD is as a violence prevention methodology. 100%, and that is why we do this work. In addition, I think we can and should think about ESD as a healing modality also, and that those two things can happen in the same spaces, in the same process, and that they are actually two sides of the same coin when we're talking about violence prevention work and trauma healing.